I recently heard the story of an influencer whom the press accused of being anti-Semitic. In response, the influencer creatively flipped the argument on its head, declaring that everyone knows anti-Semitism is an accusation created by the Jews themselves that they use to silence criticism and quash free speech. With notable backing, the influencer filed a libel suit against the accusers and stunningly won. This influencer was not the leader of the Proud Boys or Nick Fuentes, nor was it a protest leader at Columbia University or Pink Floyd's Roger Waters. It was, in fact, Adolf Hitler, 103 years ago in 1921. The outright denial of anti-Semitism as a key characteristic of anti-Semitism is nothing new. Whether coming from the Nazis or Soviet propaganda last century, to the Spanish Inquisition, to the Crusades, or all the way back to the introduction of supersessionist ideology and theology at the dawning of the first millennium. But as we've all come to recognize so deeply over the last year in particular, this unique, disturbing feature of anti-Semitism is a trope, a repetitive narrative that continues to plague our society. On the manifestation of this hypocrisy today, scholar Dara Horn, author of the powerful, albeit disturbing book, People Love Dead Jews. Have you read it? You should read it. Horn does not mince words when she writes, in addition to intimidation and violence, since October 7th, Jews have been loudly and proudly ostracized in what can only be described as an ongoing campaign to push Jews out of American public life. People have tried to rationalize this as simply passionate, free speech, an expression of concern for civilians in Gaza whose suffering is undeniable. But this is an implausible conclusion because when people actually care about civilians, they do not express that compassion by harassing and intimidating other civilians. We've seen the consequences of this mindset in the most ironic of places: Holocaust education. Illinois was the first state to mandate Holocaust education, something about which all of us should actually be very proud. But if you have a student who has studied it of late, you know about the academic approach of universalizing the Holocaust, equating it alongside all other genocides. As Horn emphasizes, on the one hand, such an approach is vital for us to understand that genocide in any form is evil. But few educators are able to connect, no less understand the Holocaust, also as part of the long, particular history of Jews being persecuted. Instead of teaching students to understand anti-Semitism as a specific pattern in society, or to even understand who Jews are, these curricula suggest that what happened to Europe's Jews, who were just like everyone else, actually happened to all of us. and when the Holocaust no longer happened to the Jews in particular, but to everyone, guess who then gets written out of the lesson plan moving forward? Sadly, this universalization opens the door to provide what Horn calls a permission structure for anti-Semitism. Here's how it works. Claim whatever has happened to the Jews as one's own experience. Announce and proclaim a noble universal ideal. And then redefine Jewish collective identity as lying about it. To see this stunning appropriation, one need look no further than the way many Holocaust studies departments and institutes responded, or better stated, failed to respond, in the wake of the October 7th pogrom, the most significant attack against the Jews since the Holocaust. Perhaps you were as appalled as I was to learn that some of these institutes outright refused to issue statements condemning Hamas. Or when they did somehow cobble together a statement, their language included a rationalization that the attacks came as a part of a larger context, and that had to be taken into consideration. The very institutes charged with teaching the Shoah and its lessons not only diminished, but outright lobotomized the Jews themselves as victims from the attack against them. And whether intentional or not, they and so many others have opened the door for the insidious and sickening reversal we now see so ubiquitously online and on the street, equating Jews with Nazis themselves. The heart of anti-Semitism is not just the oppression or subjugation of the Jew and Jewishness, but ultimately, through means subtle and not, the erasure of both. The erasure of Jewish identity and experience, and even the erasure of Jews as victims of prejudice. Nowhere was this laid more bare than on campus this past year. In an ADL survey, some 73%, nearly 3/4 of Jewish college students reported they were exposed to anti-Semitism in the 2023-2024 school year, and more than 50% said they feel physically, not emotionally, physically unsafe on campus. Let me share only the most benign of stories that my clergy colleagues and I have heard since October 7th with you. Story after story of students being blocked from access to university buildings because they were somehow identified as Jews. Roommates who proudly carried posters to their campus protests, encampments, and die-ins that proclaimed, "Globalize the Intifada." Stories of professors in classes that had nothing to do with Israel, the Middle East, or religion, wearing shirts with images of paragliders on them. Canceling class for students to participate in their respective universities' encampment. If not outright assigning students mandatory research papers and presentations about Israel as a settler colonial enterprise or Hamas as freedom fighters. I received a text this past spring from a student telling me that she was terrified to leave her classroom because just outside the doors, her fellow students were banging on drums and chanting, "By any means necessary," and "Hitler was right." The most benign of the examples. These experiences aren't limited to students. A different survey from this last June revealed that more than 1 in 10, 12% of American Jewish adults said they ended a friendship or relationship with a person since October 7th because of the other person expressing anti-Semitic views outwardly. More than a quarter of US Jews said they have hidden their Jewish identity or have chosen not to disclose it when meeting someone new since the war began. So many of you have shared with us that you have found yourself unsure about wearing your Magen David on your neck or having a mezuzah on your door. I am no longer surprised when you call me to share that a friend or a colleague has posted something on social media that has delighted in or outright called for harm or even murder of the Jews. As I stated on Erev Rosh Hashanah, whether you recognize it or not, we are now all October 8th Jews, faced with the choice of giving into our despair or daring to grab onto even the littlest bit of agency in order to somehow move forward. For our purposes, this Yom HaKippurim, I'd like to suggest that a necessary part of that agency must be a resolute commitment to counter the forces that would erase us by deeply embracing our particular Jewish identities, Jewish practices, and Jewish peoplehood. We know the anti-Semites playbook. We've literally been here before. We must not make the mistake of failing to see how our history and our sacred stories might still illuminate for us a path forward. Ever notice how within the name Yom HaKippurim is Purim? Purim? If you translate it literally, Yom HaKippurim means a day, Yom, Ka, like, Purim, Purim. A day like Purim. Why on earth would that be? After all, aren't Yom Kippur and Purim the antithesis of one another? Maybe something deeper is going on. Remember that Purim story? Hearing that the anti-Semitic Haman has a plan to annihilate the Jews, Mordecai goes to Esther, the queen, begging her to use her position of privilege to save the Jewish people, her people, our people. But she does not readily agree. After all, she has hidden her Jewish identity from the king. The name Esther literally means the one who hides. Additionally, she notes the personal risk she would be taking on, as no one can go to the king uninvited, even his wife. If she shows up without an invitation, she could be killed. They should talk to a marriage therapist, not a model. Listen then to the words that Mordecai says to Esther in response to her rejecting her position. Umi yodea, im la'at katzot higat l'malchut. Who knows? Perhaps you have attained your position for just such a time as this. Esther understands the weight of the moment. She goes on to reveal her Jewish identity and Haman's evil plan for her husband. This results in Haman's hanging and the saving of her people. Esther does not choose her moment. Her choice is whether to stay in hiding as a Jew or to identify herself outwardly, fully, rising to the occasion as just such a time calls her to do. Who among us would have ever chosen this moment in which we now find ourselves? And yet, who knows? Perhaps we have each arrived at whichever place we find ourselves for just such a time as this. This Yom HaKippurim, every one of us here today is Esther. And it is time to come out of hiding. This past year, in the face of our attempted erasure, so many of you have inspired me with your claiming of Jewish agency, deepening your Jewish values, Jewish identity, Jewish practice, and connection to the Jewish people. Alongside the fear, we've witnessed countless acts of Jewish resilience by so many. Those same college students, whether previously Jewishly engaged or not, who've chosen to live their Judaism out loud, taking on Jewish ritual and observance individually and communally. Those same college students who have bravely and respectfully, mind you, called out their teachers and administrators when they've been targeted. And most notably, because they were raised on the particular Jewish values of justice, peace, and tikkun olam, they've stayed at the table, seeking dialogue with interfaith partners when it has proven essentially impossible otherwise. They've not allowed others to erase them from the particular Jewish demand to help create a whole and healed world. To our students on campus here in this sanctuary and listening to this sermon wherever you are, we see you. We, your clergy and your educators, we are here for you, and we want you to know you have nothing to hide. So many others have taken up the Esther mantle in their own ways. From the 80-year-old who declared the week after October 7th that he would now keep kosher, to the empty nester who decided that now is the time to sign up for adult B'nai Mitzvah, or to study the Talmud, to the countless many who've engaged more deeply bringing Israel into their Jewish lives. Want to know something fascinating? This year at NSCI, we have exponentially more people choosing to convert to Judaism than any year before. A phenomenon that my clergy colleagues around the country confirm they are experiencing in their own communities as well. Each time I have been blessed to listen to the stories of why these soon-to-be Jews have chosen to throw their lot in with the Jewish people, I never am failed to be moved. They're choosing any time, no less a time just such as this one, speaks powerfully, loudly, profoundly to the meaning-filled, anchoring, life-affirming religion, people, culture, practice, and family that is Judaism. The Hasidic master, the Sfat Emet, teaches that there are two types of Jews: Jews by chance and Jews by choice. Jews by chance are any of us born into Judaism or who become Jewish but choose to leave its activation in a passive state. And then there are Jews by choice. Not just Jews who convert to Judaism, but any Jew or member of a Jewish family who chooses to express Jewish identity outwardly, proudly, particularly, in the myriad ways that Judaism makes possible for us. Precisely for just such a time as this Yom HaKippurim calls upon us to choose what type of Jews and Jewish families we want to be in this new year. Jews by chance might very well hide, but Jews by choice make their Judaism manifest, inside and out. If you think about it, Yom Kippur and Purim are not really so different after all. Both teach that it's never too late to claim our agency, to make a choice that can change the course of our lives or even our history. And notably, The rabbis of old proclaimed that when the Messiah comes, ushering in Olam Haba, a perfect world, only 2 Jewish holidays will remain: Yom Kippur and Purim. We will not be erased, nor should we erase ourselves. We will not allow anyone else to define Judaism for us, now and ever. Gemar Chatima Tova. May each of us and the whole house of Israel be inscribed and sealed for goodness, for blessing, and for peace in the book of life. Shana Tova.